Hello and welcome to the Gnostic Warrior radio show and podcast, broadcasting from GnosticWarrior.com in San Diego, California, to around the world. I'm your host, Mo, and today on the show we have author and 32nd degree Freemason Robert W. Sullivan IV. Robert is a philosopher, historian, jurist, theologian, writer, and lawyer who will discuss the esoteric doctrines contained in his new book, The Royal Arch of Enoch, The Impact of Masonic Ritual, Philosophy, and Symbolism. This work is over 20 years of research that is a true life, Da Vinci Code, and national treasure. So how you doing today, Robert? How's the weather there? And you're in Baltimore, Maryland, correct?
Yes, Mo. Hello, how are you? It's great to be here today on Gnostic Warrior. Right now, it's a little windy, a little rainy out. The major storm that was coming through basically missed us. We got some wind. It's been a little cool, around 41 degrees. Nothing too bad. Windy and a little cold, overcast, but typical November weather here in Maryland.
Yeah, I know you guys have some storms coming your way, but again, that's kind of typical for this time of year, right?
Oh, absolutely. The last couple winters here have been mild, to say the least. But, typical, like 41 degrees, I want to say it is right now outside, which is your typical mid-November weather here in Maryland.
Okay, cool. And what I'd like to get into before we get into your book, The Royal Arch of Enoch, tell us a little bit about your background before, you got into your research now up until that and the authoring of your book.
Sure. My name is Robert W. Sullivan IV. I was born here in Baltimore, Maryland. This is where I reside. I went to high school here. I graduated high school in 1990. High school I went to was called Friends School of Baltimore. It's a very old private school. I went to, my alma mater is Gettysburg College in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. I graduated there with a history degree in 1995. I technically should have been in the class of 1994, but I took a year off. I spent my junior year abroad at Oxford University. This would have been in 1990. This would have been the autumn of 1992 through the summer of 1993. I spent that at Oxford University at St. Catherine's College studying European history and philosophy. When I came back to the States, I did not return to Gettysburg. I took a year off, so let's see, this would have been around July of 1993 to around July of 1994. I worked at a program located on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. called the Washington International Studies Council. I was office director there for a year. When that ended, I went back to Gettysburg, and I finished my senior year at Gettysburg, 1994, 1995. Like I said, I graduated there with a BA in history. It was a couple years later, 1997, that I went to law school. I went to Widener University in Delaware. There's two Widener universities. There's one in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and there's one in Wilmington, Delaware. I went to the Wilmington, Delaware campus, and I earned my JD. That was awarded in 2000. From approximately 2001 to 2008, I worked at various law firms in the Baltimore metropolitan area, focusing primarily in the areas of insurance defense work, product liability, things like that. I became a Freemason in 1997. I applied for membership in the lodge in 1996. This would have been in the summer of 1996. The lodge I'm a member of is called Amicable St. John's Lodge number 25. That's here in Baltimore, Maryland as well. When I applied, it was just known as Amicable Lodge number 25. It's since merged with another lodge, and now it's Amicable St. John's Lodge number 25. That's here in Baltimore. I applied for the membership in that in the summer of 1996, and finally was raised to the degree of Master Mason in the fall of 1997. If the listeners aren't aware, during the summer months, and this is universal, Freemasonry goes dark. There's no lodge meetings in July and August. That dates back to the foundation of Freemasonry, where during the summer months it was too hot to meet. And the lodges obviously weren't air-conditioned back in the day, and that's a tradition that goes on to this day. During the summer months, there's no Masonic Lodge meetings. So I became a Blue Lodge Mason, a Master Mason in the fall of 1997, and I became a 32nd degree of the Scottish Rite In 1999, that would be the Valley of Baltimore, Orient of Maryland.
Good. That's what I was going to ask you. I'm glad you answered that question. It's interesting that your history, as far as where you grew up, is all in these locations that have a lot of Freemasonic history and also the foundations of our country. Did you feel that growing up in these areas and going to school before you became a Freemason? Did you know about that at all?
Well, I had always been interested from a very early age in things like mysticism, the esoteric, things like that. I should point out that in my family, lots of my great-grandfathers, my grandfathers have all been Masons, so I come from a long line of Maryland Masons. It's something I always wanted to do, and of course, when you're in college and things like that, it's sort of an afterthought. It really didn't take hold of me until after I got out of college, and the way I got in was it was through my mother and father. They're both antique dealers, and through a mutual friend of theirs who was in this lodge. I asked him if I could join, and he recommended me to the lodge. This would have been back in 1996, and this person's no longer alive, by the way. But growing up in this area, especially when you get into the Baltimore, Washington area, you will clearly see the Masonic influences upon these cities. At the time, even growing up, I kind of really wasn't cognizant of it. It really wasn't until after I became a Mason and you start learning about the Founding Fathers and their Masonic involvements, and then these Masonic architecture doing the designs of these, cityscapes, that, really becomes apparent. But in a nutshell, during that time frame, I appreciated the history. Certainly the lodge, the Masonic lodge that I belong to, actually, the charter of the lodge actually predates the founding of Baltimore City. You're talking late 1700s, so it's one of the older lodges here in the state of Maryland. But growing up, I always appreciated the history. We're here on the East Coast, so you definitely have, ties to the Revolution, with Baltimore, Philadelphia, Washington, that whole, I-95 corridor. But growing up, I always appreciated the history. I was really not cognizant of the Masonic history per se. That really didn't take root until after I had joined the lodge. And really wasn't, until the late 1990s, early 2000s, when you really start to read up about not only Washington and Franklin, but guys like L'Enfant, Latrobe, Robert Mills, James Hoban, people like that.
Yeah, what's interesting to me is that I'm finding this out, even though you have a family with a strong Masonic history, it seems that they don't push that on the children. So say your father was a Mason and your grandfather, which was his father, was a Freemason. It seems like, they didn't push that on you, and it was something that you had to come to at free will yourselves.
Yeah, I think you're right there, because if you take my father's side, on that line of the family, my grandfather. So my name is Robert W. Sullivan IV. This would be Robert W. Sullivan Jr. The second. He was a Mason. His father, Robert W. Sullivan Sr., was a Mason. He actually was a past master of a lodge. A past master is the title given to someone who has ruled the lodge for a year as what's called the worshipful master. After they step down, they're known as a past master. They were both active in Masonry. Now, my father is not a Mason. It skipped over him.
Okay.
He had no interest in it whatsoever, and has no interest in it to this day. It's completely skipped over him and kind of went to me, and it was something I always was interested in. One of the things, I mentioned this on another show recently, to me, and it's inside and outside family relationships, I think for a Mason, one of the sort of worst things you can possibly try to do is try to cajole someone into joining a Masonic lodge who genuinely isn't interested. This usually results with disastrous consequences. Not disastrous like life or death or anything, but usually what happens, I've seen this in my lodge where you have an older person who wants their grandson to join, or a nephew or something like that, and the truth be told, the person has absolutely no interest in it, but is just doing it to appease, the elder. They go through the ritual one time, or the first-degree ritual, and you never see him again. And it's something that you should do unilaterally on your own. If you have to be talked into it, it's probably not for you. It's something within. For me, it was always something I wanted to do, so I was really anxious to join it. I know friends of mine who have no interest in it whatsoever. Alternatively, I have friends who have been very interested in it, who I've recommended to other lodges. This includes out-of-state lodges, lodges in Connecticut and New York, things like that. So it's really a personal decision. But yeah, as a Mason, you know, if a person is genuinely not interested in it, probably better off just leaving them alone.
Yeah, I agree, definitely. What's interesting to me as well, it seems like there's two different classes of Freemasons that join the lodge. Of course, you would have classes yourself that seems like you're into, you know, the esoteric side of Freemasonry, as well as, I'm sure, the history and the different things that go along with it, with your book, The Royal Arch of Enoch. And then there's the other Freemasons that have no interest in the esoteric side of it and really don't have much knowledge in regards to the history of Freemasonry, and they're kind of just go through the motions, and it's more of kind of a club to them. Do you agree with that statement?
I would agree with it to an extent, and the extent would be this. I definitely think you have, you know, it seems to me, this is what I've observed, is it's you know, when you get into Freemasonry and you get into, I wouldn't necessarily say it's two classes. You definitely have Masons who are interested in the esoteric. You have Masons who are not interested in the esoteric. Certainly, there's no wrong answer. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, you can't dictate a person what their interests are. I mean, for me, I like the esoteric side of it. Some Masons aren't that interested in it. What you really had was, at least, you know, this is what my research has led me to believe, and you know, you can kind of see this throughout history, is with Masonry in this country. I'm just going to go through this as quick as I can.
Sure.
You had this thing in the 1920s called the William Morgan Affair, which basically all but wiped out Masonry in this country. This guy, newspaper editor, I believe he was, named William Morgan in New York, was threatening to reveal Masonic secrets. This didn't go over well. In a nutshell, he was taken over the Canadian line and disposed of, likely killed. We don't know to this day really what happened. But at any rate, the Masons who were put on trial, it was a kangaroo court. The judge was a Mason. The jury was a Mason. These guys were acquitted. There was this huge anti-Masonic backlash in the country. Masonry survived it, but one of the methods, one of the things it had to do in order to survive this attack was it had to distance itself from the esoteric and sort of the occult, mystical side of things. And Masonry reemerges as just a charitable, philanthropic organization. Now, don't get me wrong, I have nothing wrong with charity and philanthropic work, but it was really this philosophical doctrine that carried Masonry through the 19th century and pretty much through the 20th century. But now it seems that the pendulum is swinging back to more the esoteric side. And what I credit this to is a couple things. One is the advent of the Internet in the late 1990s, 2000s, where you have this information much more accessible to people, and especially to younger people, where back in the day, you never even heard of people. I mean, look, when I went through the ritual, back in 1997, I really wasn't an expert on Albert Pike or Manly Palmer Hall. It wasn't until really afterwards that, I really started understanding the philosophical and symbolic importance of the rituals that I had just gone through. It was after the fact. But now you've got this younger generation, this Internet generation, who have grown up knowing nothing else, and they can access the, videos about Manly Palmer Hall or about esoteric Masonry and Masonic symbolisms. Then you get, the Dan Brown material and, of course, the National Treasure movies. This all, has sort of revitalized Masonry, but what it's done is it has definitely generated an interest in more of the esoteric side. I mentioned this on another show, and I'll mention it here. I want to say it was 2 or 3 years ago, the Scottish Rite Southern jurisdiction, that's the jurisdiction I'm in, did a poll of recent young men, and when I say young men, I think 35 and younger, who were joining the Masonic Lodge, and they asked them, what was your motivation in joining? Well, up until recently, up until this date, the answer given was the answer that I gave. It was either family connections, family tradition, or interest in helping the community, things like that. Well, in this poll that was given, it was something like, 35%, 40% said they were, joining Masonry due to the esoteric, traditions of the fraternity, the occult, mystical symbolisms. They were interested in this. So what you're beginning to see now is the pendulum swing back the other way, where, Masonry is being revitalized, and the esoteric, mystical, numinous side of things is definitely taking hold once again.
It's interesting that we're seeing a lot of that here in the United States, and then you also hear, of course, there's the conspiracy, and I attribute that to people not understanding everything, and they misinterpret the Masonic symbols, the Masonic agenda, the different Masonic ties and so forth. So that's why we have a big conspiracy on the internet that surrounds it. Do you believe that the Freemasons don't mind that this happens because it further conceals what they're doing and at the same time draws interest towards the craft?
Well, I think it is kind of a double-edged sword. I think it definitely draws interest. I mean, some of the stuff, some of the stuff, I don't know if I would necessarily throw it into the conspiratorial world. I mean, you definitely have Masonic, architecture around D.C., the templates of the cities. This I document in the book. Of course, the founders of this country were Masons. You got the development of the United States constitutions, which reflects the constitutions of Freemasonry. You've got a lot of the architects running around the country at the early stages, at the birth of the country, who are all Masons. People like L'Enfant, Latrobe, Mills, Hoban, people like that. So Masonry definitely influenced the development of the country, and you'll see it in the architecture. Is it evidence of a vast conspiracy? No, not really. It's just they're using Masonry and its symbols and its related philosophies as nation-building devices. Is probably the best way I can describe it. Now, I will say in the earlier days of this country, we're talking late 1700s, 1800s, early 1800s, you're definitely, will see a Masonic influence, and you'll definitely see, elements of Freemasonry working in secret, especially among some of the higher degrees, to influence policy, social development, economics over state lines. So you can definitely see a bit of a conspiratorial aspect to it. I don't think it was meant to be anything negative, but again, this was part of the William Morgan backlash of the 1820s. This, when this concept that Masons were working together over state lines to formulate policy didn't really go over too well. But then when you get into some of the stuff on the internet today, some of it is just really, out there. I mean, I try to stay away from the reptilian shapeshifters. Some of that stuff. I think the craft definitely distanced itself from that. But for Masonry to be a fraternal organization that provides, positive philosophical devices and nation building and things like that, I don't think it's really necessary too conspiratorial. I guess I can see where it's perceived that way, but I guess I see a positive influence where a lot of people may see a negative influence.
Yeah, no, I agree. If you really think about it, it's out there for everybody to see and to witness for themselves. The United States of America, the first president was a Freemason, George Washington, and several presidents thereafter were as well. And it seems like it's more of a secret thing now. Who knows if it deals with the Morgan affairs, or basically that we don't know who's a Freemason now.
Well,
as far as presidency. So would you say the United States was a Freemasonic built country? Because you were saying
yes.
nation building? Okay.
Yes. Well, what I have, just real quick, because you threw something out. Yeah, when you get into like the presidents, a lot of this stuff is part of the public domain. Now, there's no like database where you can go and look up to see who's a Freemason and who isn't. A lot of the more famous people is pretty commonly known, whether they're a Mason or not. A lot of them wear rings like myself or a lapel pin, identifying themselves as a Mason. And you're correct. Washington was a Mason. He's of course, our first president. You have a lot of other Masons a lot of other presidents who have been Masons. People in Congress, the Senate, Supreme Court. I want to say the last president to be a Mason was Gerald R. Ford. He was really the last Masonic president that we've had. President Reagan was honorary, so I kind of really don't count him. And before Ford, you have to go back to Harry Truman and FDR. Those were the last three Masonic presidents. When you get into the concept of the United States, I have I have a chapter in the book called the United States of Freemasonry, and I present that the United States is what I describe as a Masonic Republic. It's the world's first Masonic Republic. You will see evidence of this in the architecture of the federal city, Washington, D.C. You will see this paralleled in Baltimore, Maryland, which is right up the street. From D.C., you will see this in the triple division of government in the country, where you have the government being divided threefold between an executive, a legislative body, and a judicial body. This comes out of Blue Lodge Freemasonry, where the governance of a lodge is triple divided between a worshipful master and the junior and senior wardens. This triple division is echoing the three phases of the sun: the rising sun, the sun at midday, and the setting sun. This is what a Masonic lodge is laid out upon, where you have the worshipful master sitting in the east, representing the rising sun, and the two wardens, one sits in the south, one sits in the west, representing the sun at midday and the setting sun. So the triple division of government is a solar reference, but is coming out of Blue Lodge Freemasonry. And of course, you will have things such as the separation of church and state. This is another Masonic doctrine. This comes out of the constitutions of Freemasonry. This is published in the early 1720s by a Presbyterian minister named James Anderson. This is shortly after the formation of the Grand Lodge in 1717 in England, where you have these legendary constitutions being drafted, and in these constitutions, Anderson basically removes a religious requirement to join Freemasonry. He makes it deistic, where you have to believe in a supreme being, a godlike creature or figure. It's known in Masonry as the grand architect of the universe, but however that individual decides to get there is up to that individual Mason. Anderson does not put a Christian or Jewish or Muslim or Buddhist requirement on it. He says if you're any one of those three, or you're just a deist, you can join. Whatever your own religion is, or your path to God is your own. So the concept of separation, from governance of religion is clearly, embedded in Freemasonry prior to the United States Constitution. So yeah, you will clearly see evidence of Freemasonry's fingerprints all over the founding of this country, in its governance, in its constitution, and even in its architecture.
What's the difference between the UK and America? Because my understanding, in the UK, you do not have to believe in a supreme deity.
In order to join a Blue Lodge, you are supposed to profess belief in a supreme being,
okay.
a god. You have some philosophical differences going on between English Masonry, American Masonry, and what's called Continental Masonry. And I'll try to plow over this as quickly as I can, because it's a long story. But what you have happening is, in England, you have the concept. There's a publication in the I want to say that comes in the 1700s by a man named William Preston, and it's called The Illustrations of Freemasonry. And in this, Preston outlines what it means to be an English Freemason. In a nutshell, he compares a Mason to the architect Vitruvius, and that he was a loyal subject of the Roman Emperor. What he's essentially saying is that to become an English Freemason, you are the most loyal subject of the monarch, of the English monarch. And this is a philosophy coming out of the works of an English lawyer named John Fortescue. Well, after and this philosophy carries on in the United States, of course, until the Revolution, where obviously we distance ourselves from the English monarchy, we declare ourselves independent, we fight a revolution and win. So after the Revolution, Masonry is left beholding the question: well, if we're not loyal, if the Mason isn't loyal to the English subject anymore, what are we? And the question's answered twofold. It's answered by a man named Thomas Smith Webb, who also writes a treatise called The Illustrations of Freemasonry. Webb's monitor and Preston's monitor have the exact same name. They're both called The Illustrations of Freemasonry. The difference is that Webb's monitor ends with the Royal Arch Ceremonial, where Preston's ritual synthesis ends with the Masonic, Master Mason degree, where the English candidate becomes a Master Mason, is the most loyal subject to the monarch. Webb alters this, where the ritual synthesis really ends with the Royal Arch Ceremonial, where the candidate beholds the Tetragrammaton, the name of God, the lost word of Hiram Abiff, the lost word of a Master Mason, and becomes a citizen, priest, king, monarch himself. And then the question is asked, well, if we're not, how do we remove the English monarch from our Masonic lodges? And the question answers itself. The English monarch is replaced with George Washington, who is basically the Masonic godfather of the country. So you will have this split between English Masonry and American Masonry. It's philosophical difference. Obviously we don't have a monarchy here. And also you will see in English Masonry a distance, it sort of distanced itself from what are called the higher degrees of Masonry, the Scottish Rite and York Rite. These are the two premier higher degree systems in this country. These are born both out of the same acorn. These are what comes out of what are called the 25 Rites of Perfection by a man named Henry Franken in Albany, New York. These degrees are ultimately developed in the mid-1700s in Paris, France, by the Society of Jesus as part of the Counter-Reformation. And of course, if you know anything about England, the French are their arch enemies. They don't like the Society of Jesus. This is the group that tried to assassinate Queen Elizabeth. And of course, Henry VIII, her father, of course, booted the Roman Catholic Church basically out of England, after the Henrican settlement, where he gets rid of the Roman Catholic Church so he can divorce, the first queen. Her name's escaping me right now. And of course, you have the creation of the Church of England, which is essentially the Roman Catholic Church, only it's Protestant, where the chief of the Church of England is the monarch, who is the de facto pope of the Church of England. So you will definitely see these philosophical splits between English Masonry, Continental Masonry, and American Freemasonry, and this is all fully outlined in the Royal Arch of Enoch, Enoch book.
Can you tell us who Enoch is?
Yeah, absolutely. This is where we get into some of the more esoteric doctrines of the book. Enoch is a person mentioned in the Book of Genesis. He is one of two biblical patriarchs never to die a physical death. It's him and the prophet Elijah is the other one. These are two more commonly known as the two witnesses to Revelation. If you've been following this new TV show on Sleepy Hollow, on Fox called Sleepy Hollow, you'll know what I'm talking about. But at any rate, in the Bible, the two witnesses to Revelation are Enoch and the prophet Elijah. They never die a physical death. Enoch, the Enoch at Genesis 5:18 through 24 is, in a nutshell, carried off into heaven in corporeal form. And there is a book called the Book of Enoch, which dates to around 350 BCE or BC, dates to the Second Temple period. And what the Book of Enoch describes is what he sees in the afterlife. And he sees some amazing things. He beholds the Tetragrammaton as a source of all wisdom, and he beholds this as the tree of life, or Hebrew Kabbalah. He interacts with archangels and a group of fallen angels known as the Watchers. He gleans knowledge from these beings, which he ultimately conceals in an underground vault to preserve this wisdom against the deluge of Noah when he returns to earth. The Book of Enoch describes all these things and what he sees. And from around the 2nd, 3rd century Common Era to around 1773, the Book of Enoch is lost to Western civilization. There are no translations of it. It's off the history pages. It's rediscovered by a Freemason named James Bruce, who returns to Europe with 4 copies from Ethiopia in 1773. They are deposited in the Bodleian Library, where they remain untranslated until 1821. Bodleian Library is the main library at Oxford University. And it's really not until 1821 that we understand what the Book of Enoch is talking about. What my book presents is this historical anomaly that's going on, where in the 1740s, 1750s, you have this high ceremonial degree, which is part of the original rite of perfection coming out of Paris, France, coming out of the College of Claremont, called the Royal Arch of Enoch. I mean, the ceremonial is named after this guy, where you will have this ritual, its underlying philosophical doctrines or basis, its symbolism, its philosophy is basically coming straight out of the Book of Enoch. You'll see it in the ritual. You will see it in its underlying philosophy. You will see it in the lessons of the ritual. You will see it in its symbolism of the ritual. You will see astral references in the ritual. This again comes out of the Book of Enoch, which has an astronomy book, and it's clear that this ritual is incorporating elements and components of the Book of Enoch, which should not be happening because technically the book was lost to history until 1821, yet clearly the creators of this high degree ceremony had access to a copy of this book and clearly had knowledge, higher Kabbalistic knowledge of what this book contained than what was known to Western civilization at the time. And my book documents how this particular high degree is being used within Freemasonry to help define things like the United States of America. You'll see Royal Arch symbology in the Federal District. You'll see solar symbology, when you know how to look for it, both in Blue Lodge Freemasonry and carried forward in this higher degree ceremonial, which is all coming out of the Book of Enoch. And it's this one particular high degree. It's the 13th In the Rite of Perfection, it becomes the 13th degree in the Scottish Rite, and it becomes the 7th degree in the York Rite, called the Royal Arch of Enoch. In the York Rite, it's called the Royal Arch of Zorobabel, which is a reference to the Second Temple, and it's clearly containing components of the Book of Enoch. And it's a brand new historical anomaly, and my book thoroughly documents that.
Why is Enoch so important to Freemasons? It seems like the symbolism and it being the 13th degree has a lot of symbolism just in itself right there.
Right. What you have going on is you have concepts related to Enoch where he beholds the secret name of God, the secret name of deity, which is called the Tetragrammaton. This is carried forward in this Royal Arch degree where in the Blue Lodge Freemasonry, in the 3rd degree, the name of God, the secret word, the Tetragrammaton, is lost. When Hiram Abiff is killed, Hiram Abiff is the builder of Solomon's temple. He's the architect in charge of it. The 3rd degree Blue Lodge ritual documents his death and the loss of this word. The word is recovered in the Royal Arch of Enoch degree ceremonial. It's important because the name Enoch literally means in Hebrew the initiated or the initiate. So we're dealing with, again, doctrines of a person being initiated into these sublime doctrines. Enoch beholds the Tetragrammaton as the source of all wisdom. That comes out of the Book of Enoch. In the high degree ceremonial, the candidate or the Tetragrammaton is recovered. If you understand the underlying philosophical doctrine of this degree, this allows for the restoration of the 7 liberal arts and sciences and all mathematical wisdom. In Masonic lore and legend, when Enoch returns to Earth with this knowledge that he's gleaned from the archangels and the watchers, he catches wind that the flood of Noah is coming, and he wants to trick God in a nutshell and preserve this wisdom. So he inscribes all this knowledge on 2 pillars and buries it in this underground vault. And in between these 2 pillars, one pillar contains the 7 liberal arts and sciences, and the other pillar contains wisdom of mathematics. He puts the Tetragrammaton, the secret name of God, which allows for the restoration of this wisdom. And of course, within the Royal Arch ceremonial, the vault of Enoch with this treasure trove is discovered. And in the underlying philosophy of this ritual, the vault had already been breached before the Masons had found it. The Tetragrammaton had been correctly pronounced by a character known as Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus. He restores the 7 liberal arts and sciences back to mankind. And of course, the mathematical wisdom is restored by Pythagoras, who breaches the vault, finds the Tetragrammaton, correctly pronounces it, and has his eureka moment, or I have found it, restores the mathematical wisdom contained on the mathematical pillar, namely the 47th proposition of Euclid, which is also known as the Pythagorean theorem. You will find this echoed in Blue Lodge Freemasonry, where the worshipful master's emblem is the Pythagorean theorem, or the 47th proposition of Euclid. That's a symbol of Masonic rulership. And of course, in the fellowcraft degree, in the 2nd degree, the candidate is encouraged to study the 7 liberal arts and sciences. This is a reference to Hermes Trismegistus, who in the Royal Arch ceremonial restores things like rhetoric, philosophy, astronomy back to mankind through the correct pronunciation of the Tetragrammaton. And again, this is the wisdom that Enoch is given to him in the Book of Enoch and brought back down to earth and survives the flood of Noah and is ultimately restored by the Freemasons.
In your book, you explain that there's a Jesuit connection here. It's the 13th in the Jesuit-styled Rite of Perfection. Can you explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. What you have going on is we talk about Blue Lodge Freemasonry. This is degrees 1, 2, and 3. This is codified on June 24th, 1717. We know that there were Blue Lodges operating in England in the 1600s, and we know that because there was a man, a real famous antiquarian and lawyer named Elias Ashmole, who joined the Masonic Lodge. Ashmole is also affiliated with this proto-Masonic group known as the Rosicrucians. It's mystical Protestantism is what Rosicrucianism is in a nutshell. But we know that there were Masonic lodges operating in England in the 1600s. They're brought together in 1717. And again, this is degrees 1, 2, and 3. What you have happening is Freemasonry really catches hold. It's a unifying force within society that's bringing people of different faiths together, and it's deism, and it's really beginning to get popular. And you have this secret order, or this order working in Europe and England known as the Society of Jesus, or the Jesuits. If you do not know, or your listeners are not aware of this, at the Council of Trent, this is after the Protestant Reformation, the Jesuits at the Council of Trent are charged with what is known as the Counter-Reformation. And these guys are put in charge of the Counter-Reformation, and they are essentially using espionage tactics, subterfuge, to assist in the destruction of the Protestant Church, to sway, Protestants back to the Pope in Rome, to infiltrate Protestant organizations and inject it with Roman Catholicism. So the Jesuits, in an effort to sort of take the wheels off of Freemasonry, which is beginning to grow and become real popular, in the 1730s, 1740s, the Society of Jesus creates what is known as the Rite of Perfection. This is being developed at the College of Clermont in Paris, France. This is a Jesuit school, and they're developing these higher degrees as a way to sort of lure Protestants back to the Church, the Catholic Church, the Pope in Rome, and they're using these higher degrees as a way to undermine the English society and the English monarch, and they're trying to use these higher degrees as a vehicle to restore the Stuart side of the Stuart monarchy back to the throne of England, who of course were deposed after the revolution of after Cromwell's dictatorship. Now the Stuarts come back, but they're ultimately deposed with the Glorious Revolution of 1689, where the Catholic side of the Stuarts comes back to the throne, doesn't take well with the English people, and they're thrown off. And the Jesuits are developing these higher degrees as a way to restore the Stuart Catholic side of the family back to the English throne. And the rites take off. They become very popular on the continent of Europe. They don't take off in London so much, and again, we talked about this earlier because of who and what they're associated with. But by the time the high degrees reach the United States of America, it's probably safe to say that the Jesuits are kind of out of the picture at that point in time. The high degrees had sort of taken on a life of its own. They're midwifed piecemeal into this country by a man named Etienne Morin through Haiti, and they are ultimately set up in the 1700s, I want to say in the 1760s. It may have been the late 1750s, I'd have to look, in Albany, New York, by a man named Henry Franken. These 25 degrees called Henry Franken's Lodge of Perfection. And this lodge ultimately births both the York Rite of Freemasonry and the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. And these 25 degrees, again, are based on the Jesuit high degrees coming out of the College of Clermont in Paris, France. So that's your Jesuit Society of Jesus influence upon Freemasonry. There's much more to it. The book documents a whole lot more. I mean, obviously, we limited time here, but the Royal Arch of Enoch book fully documents the Jesuit influence upon modern-day Freemasonry.
Just to elaborate on that, so basically, in order to make degrees in Freemasonry, they must have had control of Freemasonry at that time to do that, correct?
No, I wouldn't say that. What they're doing is they're perpetuating these higher degrees to lure the Blue Lodge. I wouldn't say they're in control of it. They're in control of the higher degree system, but not necessarily the Blue Lodge. And what they're trying to do is infiltrate the Blue Lodge through these high degrees, get Protestant Masons interested in these higher degree systems, which have a lot of, if you're familiar with the Scottish Rite and the York Rite, you'll see a lot of Roman Catholic elements in this. Without getting too specific, for example, in the York Rite of Freemasonry in the United States ends with the Knights Templars, who have commanderies and encampments. And of course, the Knights Templars were this Roman Catholic warrior monk class in the Middle Ages, who fought in the Holy Lands during the Crusades. And of course, in the Scottish Rite, you will see concepts of, and again, I don't want to get too specific here, but you will see concepts of a Jesuit-styled confession going on, or vow in the 14th degree in the Scottish Rite. So you will clearly see Jesuit and Catholic elements. I wouldn't say they were in control of Blue Lodge Freemasonry at the time. They were using the higher degrees as a way to try to infiltrate Blue Lodge Freemasonry. The Jesuits in the 1800s, well, more the 1700s, were essentially the Vatican's form of the CIA. They were using espionage tactics, subterfuge, anything, any means necessary to thwart, destroy the Protestant Church.
Are they still doing that today?
Pretty much no. It depends on who you want to talk to. The Society of Jesus, like Freemasonry, had a lot of its power undercut from them. The Freemasons lost a lot of their influence with the William Morgan affair of the 1820s, I want to say 1826. Likewise, the Jesuits, their political meddlings, their occultism, their influence really got on the Pope's nerves in 1773, and the Jesuits are suppressed by the Pope in Rome. I've talked about this on other shows. I'll mention it here, and you can ask me about it if you want to go in this line. But the Jesuit order is suppressed in 1773. What happens in 1776? You have this new secret society come on the scene, again, that's commingling with Freemasonry, known as Bavarian Illuminati, more commonly known to history as the Illuminati. This is the Illuminati of a man named Adam Weishaupt, formed on May the 1st, 1776. I have said on other programs, and I mentioned it in the book, and I stand by this, that the Illuminati of Bavaria of Adam Weishaupt was nothing more than the Jesuits under another name. This is confirmed by a Freemason who joined, and a very affluent Freemason who joined the Illuminati by the name of Adolf Knigge. He was a German aristocrat who was very much interested in the democratic ideals, the Pythagorean fire of the Illuminati. When he joins, he gets a whole host of Prussian Freemasons to join. He subsequently leaves the order and writes a treatise saying that I joined the Illuminati to engage in this sort of equality fraternity that was espousing equality for all citizens. He said this is all nonsense. These guys, these Illuminati leaders are all closet Jesuits. This is just the Jesuits under another name. And of course, if you look at the history books, we know that the Jesuits are suppressed in 1773. You have this new group, the Illuminati, come on the scene, and it's the Illuminati that sort of seems to carry the Jesuits through the wars of Napoleon, the French Revolution, and then after the wars of Napoleon are concluded, with his defeat, you have the restoration of the Papal States, the restoration of the Jesuits, and the restoration of the Holy Inquisition. So the Jesuits come back, but they're not one. It's like Masonry. A lot of their power, they've been undercut substantially in 1773. They still have influence, but they're not the operators that they once were.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have a new Jesuit Pope. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that is interesting. I wasn't aware. I remember when Francis I was sworn in, they mentioned he was a Jesuit, and they said, oh, well, there must have been another Jesuit Pope, and actually there wasn't. He is the first Jesuit Pope. It's interesting because you sort of have almost going on simultaneous, right now, and I mentioned this in the book, you have this sort of almost synchronicity going on with the revival of Freemasonry, both Blue Lodge and High Degree going on. We talked about earlier how this esoteric revival seems to be going on right now. And now you almost have, the Jesuits coming back almost in the, being more influential. This comes out of, and this is really interesting that this is going on right now, this is coming out of the works, it seems, of a Christian mystic, a medieval Christian mystic known as Joachim von Fiore. And I mentioned this all over the place in the Royal Arch of Enoch book because he prophesied this new order of the ages that was going to be moderated by these two secret groups, the secular hermits and spiritual mystics, which have been always defined as the Freemasons and the Jesuits. And he gets into these concepts of new ages, and there's an old age of the Father and the age of the Son. He said, but there's going to be this new age coming up, and of course, I believe I mentioned this in the Royal Arch of Enoch book that this is syncretic of this age of Aquarius that we are now entering into, based on the Platonic year. where we are leaving the old age of Pisces behind and entering into this new age of Aquarius, which von Fiore seems to be prophesizing, which is going to be this new age moderated by these two spiritual orders. And here we have this new revival of Freemasonry and the Jesuits at the same time. Just very interesting going on. Yeah, I mean, is it a coincidence? I don't know. It doesn't seem to be to me at any rate.
Yeah, it doesn't. And there's lots of signs coming out from, the Vatican letting us know that these are those days possibly with, seems like to be reversing the old days of the Vatican and condemning, capitalism. And every week there's something new that he's coming out that's new, and even with some edicts from the Roman Curia. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. And I know he had just went to Russia, the Russian President Putin just went to visit him yesterday, I believe, which is unique because they would be on the Orthodox side of Christianity and at one time part of the Byzantine Empire. And I know, of course, the East and the West, those two empires have, they've been partners and then they warred together. And one more thing before you go on is this year when the Pope was inaugurated, they did it in Greek instead of Latin, and that was the first time ever. So something's huge going on.
Yeah, that's interesting. And also you seem to have sort of, when we get into this concept of the Platonic era and this new age of Aquarius, you have these more, sort of these egalitarian doctrines, and you seem to almost be seeing like a relaxation of some of the more stricter Catholic doctrines. And I say in the book, with this age of Aquarius, I say in the book that you've seen deacons of this for the last 70 years, and the two I identify as women being given the right to vote in this country, and then of course most recently the election of the first ever American, the election of a first African American president. I believe those are deacons of the coming age of Aquarius. Probably a lot of interesting things are going to happen over the next 50 to 100 years. We know that these ages just don't kickstart and end on a dime. It's a gradual, phase process of one age coming in and one age going out. Usually takes about, there are always, of course, cusp periods when you're dealing with astrological signs, even on the Platonic year. So, if we're leaving Pisces behind and entering Aquarius, it's going to be probably in the next 150 to 200 years, should see some interesting changes coming down the pike, one would think.
Yeah, definitely. So you would think right now your philosophy on our age right now is that we're on that transition where the old is basically transitioning out and the new is transitioning in, and it's kind of like an in tandem kind of thing. It doesn't happen overnight, but actually over decades. And then this would coincide with ages and how they, we're in the year 2013, which is unique because, this is, the Royal Arch degree is the 13th degree, and I know that numbers play a big part in how everything's done. So would you say we're entering into a new age and it just won't be announced till 100 years down the road when someone writes about it? Or
Yeah, I think that's right. I think a lot of authors, myself included, have mentioned that, Pisces is coming to an end, and then Aquarius is now starting. You talk about numbers. It's interesting you mentioned that because in the Royal Arch of Enoch book, if we just backpedal, and, I'm getting a little controversial here, but that's okay. We get to, these astrological ages seem to last 2,000 years, 2,100 years. And of course, it's called the precession of the equinox because the sun spends 2,000 years in this one sign, moving backwards in the sign 1 degree every 72 years. So the last 2,100 years or so, we've been in the house of Pisces, and of course this has been talked about by other, Masonic mystics before, where the age of Pisces is Christianity, where Jesus is the, sun, S-U-N instead of S-O-N, and, feeds his followers with the two fishes and washes people's feet because Pisces rules the feet. And, is the virgin birth. Virgo is the opposite out of Pisces and has the 12 apostles who are the 12 houses of the zodiac. This is the Piscean age of the last 2,000 years. And then, of course, now we're leaving Pisces and entering into Aquarius. And at the one biblical passage on this, and I mentioned this in the Royal Arch of Enoch book, you mentioned numbers, and this is like Kabbalistic, information, concealed numerology within the Bible. You actually have this biblical verse where the 12 apostles Ask Jesus. If you look at this in an astrological standpoint, it makes sense where, and I'm going to paraphrase the quote. I don't have the quote in front of me right now, but in a nutshell, you have the 12 apostles ask Jesus. This is at Luke 22:10, where the 12 apostles ask Jesus, well, where are you, basically they're asking, where are you going next? And Jesus, being the Son, says, in a nutshell, he said, well, after Pisces is over, he said, you will enter the house of the man carrying the water pitcher, or the earthen pitcher of water, where the man carrying the water pitcher is, of course, the sign of Aquarius, which would make sense after Pisces. It moves backwards, so, Aquarius precedes Pisces, so that would be the next house up. And, of course, the number, 2210. The number 2210 contains all the digits of 12/21, 2012. I mean, they're all right there, which is the end of the Piscean age, really. It's the December 21st, 2012 countdown, the end of the Mayan calendar, which is the heralding the symbolic end of Pisces and the jumpstart of Aquarius. So, yeah, you get into numbers, very important right there.
What does it signify to us, the common man on the street? Because I believe we're managed by a type of magic, and I'm not sure if you'll elaborate in a little bit after, I talk a little bit about this Enochian magic and symbolism, and that we're possibly managed by this magical system. And you had mentioned that, Jesus had went pretty much from the sun, S-O-N, to being the sun. It's almost as if we went from the age of gnosis and knowing thyself to a deity outside of us, where we were looking for everything outside of us, and in reality, that's inside of us is we're, our own pretty much gods, and we could find that true bliss inside of us as opposed into some religion or some outside being or some planet, a billion miles away.
Well, I think what you're talking about right now, and I tend to agree with you, is you're almost talking the doctrines of Aquarius, where, it's almost like a belief in a supreme being. I've been asked this before. It's like, well, what do you think the religious worship will take form in Aquarius? I said on another program, and I'll say it here, I think it's almost, I agree with you, I think it's almost the absence of religion. I think it's more deism than an actual religious belief, which we get a little controversial here, but again, I don't really mind. When you get into concepts of religion versus faith, the belief in a supreme being is faith, where the belief about the personality of deity is religion. This would be Christianity, Islam, Judaism. I'm just picking those three because they're the big three. But, even like Buddhism, things like that, or Hinduism. So to me, it's almost like with Aquarius, it's almost like, you're right, it's almost like a gnosis, where you don't need the external. It's more of a belief in a supreme being, a belief in yourself. Not necessarily that man is God, but man, I think, is more trying to be like God. And I would stress and underscore the word like. But yeah, you have Aquarius coming up, which to me would seem to be the absence of religion, more of a deistic approach. We've talked about Pisces, which would be the last 2,000 years. This would, of course, be, Jesus, the Piscean fisherman, turns everyone into the fisher of men. And of course, Peter is the fisherman who carries forth Christianity after, the crucifixion. I get into all the astral references of the Bible, Old and New Testament, in the Royal Arch of Enoch book. Of course, we get into Jesus being the Son with the 12 apostles, who are the 12 houses of the zodiac. This, of course, is also in the Old Testament, where you have Moses would be the sun. Moses would be Aries the ram. And, of course, the 12 tribes of Israel would be the 12 houses of the zodiac. That would be pre-Christian. That would be the pre-Christian Aryan age. And then now we have Pisces wrapping up. And, we'd be entering into Aquarius, where I tend to agree with you that you would have sort of this absence of religion, something to that effect. But I don't think you're going to see the real, the real, the quote-unquote age of Aquarius full-blown probably for another 150 to 200 years. So, but you're going to definitely see some interesting changes coming down the pike in the next 50 to 100. That almost seems certain.
Yeah, definitely. And if you study history at the different times where various empires had come into power, it seems like they almost ruled for X amount of years, whether it be a couple hundred or sometimes 500, sometimes a 1,000 years, and then a new power comes in, and the old gods and deities are literally torn down and new ones put up, and different things happen. So it seems like that's what's happening now. And with the old Pope Benedict going out and the new Pope right at this time this is happening, where maybe Pope Benedict would be maybe a little bit more flamboyant and materialistic with how he had dressed and portrayed himself, and then we have a more humble Pope now with Pope Francis. Kind of, it's just like all right there in front of us.
I think like, I agree with you. It's almost like a kickstart almost to this new, sort of, more democratic, free-thinking age, and a relaxation of the doctrines of the old age of Pisces. I think you're beginning to see that now come down the pike, and I agree with you 100%.
What role do you see Russia playing in this? Because, of course, Russia is somewhat of the sleeping, bear up in the north that has only grown in size and power over the last, 50, 100 years, and then they're just getting bigger and bigger, and it seems like you see them more in the news, and, President Putin is not only president of the biggest country in the world, he's also president of the G20, and then to top that off, they're doing almost the exact opposite of what America and other countries here in the West and the UK are doing in regards to how they're managing their society. It's more of a Christian-based society, and, they're not caving in to other religions in that country, and, they put a ban on any advertising for abortion. I believe that was today, and, just recently they put a ban on what Putin had said was gay propaganda, because he feels that, if you want to be gay, that's fine, but don't influence other people with that. Where in America, it's like, hey, yeah, everybody, it's no big deal, and it's like the exact opposite, almost like.
Right. Yeah, it's. I think Russia, with the end of communism and things like that, you definitely see a loosening of the reins. But again, with things like Russia, China, if we're gonna buy into the Aquarian age, then over the next 50 to 100 years, you're going to see the relaxation of these doctrines, of this, hard, stringent, ideological, doctrines, both on the right and left. It's going to be probably more of a, middle of the line sort of thing, middle of the road sort of thing. But again, with Russia and China and, some of these more hardline countries, I think it's more of just a time frame. And again, it's like in this country, you go back, we live now in 2013, but if you just go back to less than 100 years ago, up until the mid-1960s, despite the fact that America had fought a civil war, African Americans up until the 1960s were all but second-class citizens, especially in the South. And that's no knock. I'm not saying that to be critical or anything, but it wasn't until the civil rights movement, and here it is, some 50 years later that we have the election of a first, African American president in this country. So things do move slowly, and times change. And I think with Russia and China and some of these hardline countries, I think the change will come. It just may take a little longer. But again, I want to stress this, that with these astrological changeovers, it's not the sort of thing that just happens overnight. It never has. It doesn't take. It takes for these ages to start and officially end. You're talking a 200 to 300 year time frame, and if we're just right now, which I believe, seeing the start of Aquarius again, you're not going to be into this sign probably for the next 150 to 200 years, when you'll be into the full-blown, age of Aquarius.
Definitely. And let's get back to the book, and I want to talk a little bit about the symbolism, that being with the Great Seal of the United States, and then also you had mentioned in here also the Seal of California as a Masonic Enochian symbol. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with the Great Seal, and then I'll go to the California Seal.
Sure.
Where the Great Seal, of course, this is the it's two-sided. If you want to see this immediately, whip out a $1 bill. The obverse is the one with the eagle, and the reverse is the truncated pyramid with the all-seeing eye on top of it. Again, I get into a whole symbolic analysis of this in the Royal Arch of Enoch book, where, and I'm just going to go through this, give you a brief outline of it just because of time. But with the obverse, with the eagle, you will see the number 13 all over the place, the 13 arrows, the 13 berries, the 13 fig leaves, the 13 stripes. This is, of course, exoterically on a more profane level. This number 13 represents the 13 colonies. On an esoteric, more mystical level, this represents this 13th degree, the recovery of the Tetragrammaton, this lost word of a Master Mason, coming out of the rite of perfection. We know this. We know that there is a Scottish rite element to this because the wings on the eagle, one side contains 32 and the other side contains 33. This is, of course, allegorizing the 32nd degree of the Scottish rite, and of course the ultimate 33rd degree of the Scottish rite. So you will definitely see this number 13 reflecting this rite of perfection, Scottish rite degree symbology of the recovery of the Tetragrammaton, this premier degree, where the lost word of a Master Mason is found. Of course, you get into some of the architecture, and I'm just going through this briefly, where the White House sits 13 blocks from the Scottish Rite Temple in Washington. Again, the number 13 is omnipresent. When you get into the other side, the truncated pyramid with the all-seeing eye, we're dealing with Egyptian solar emblems and symbols, where you have the words, thus begins the new order of the ages. You will see the number 13 embedded in this. And again, the new order of the ages is, of course, what we were just talking about, this new, Aquarian, age, which I believe, and I suggest in the book, that the United States is basically the creation of this, the creation of the United States as this Masonic Republic is sort of heralding and announcing this new Aquarian age that is now coming down the pike. That's the motto, thus begins, or thus announcing the new order of the ages, with the, truncated pyramid with the all-seeing eye. On top, the eye is, of course, deity, or the eye of providence, which has been used within Freemasonry. The all-seeing eye has been used within Freemasonry on Masonic degree certificates since its inception. So you basically have a reference to this 13th degree, the recovery of the Tetragrammaton, combined with this announcing of this new order of the ages, which to me is this new Aquarian age coming down the pipe. I get into more detail in the Royal Arch of Enoch book, but just briefly, that's what I get into in the book on the symbolic interpretation of the Great Seal. The California Seal is really interesting. What you have going on here is you have the Virgin Goddess of Wisdom, Minerva, appearing on the Seal of California. She is lifted from the seal of Union College of Schenectady, New York, which was the first college set up after the Revolution to offer high degrees in civil engineering or operative masonry. It's too long of a story to get into, but the template of Union College is the sunburst. It's the domed building coming out of the vaulted quadrangle, which is representing the sun, or this esoteric wisdom, being removed from the Enochian underground vault. That comes off the Royal Arch degree certificate of Benjamin Hurd. And of course, Minerva is the Virgin Goddess of Wisdom, so she's representing this restoration of this lost wisdom in a Masonic fashion. We know that that's irrefutable because the Minerva is the seal, is the sigil of Union College, and the motto is, "We are all now brothers under the laws of Minerva." She is carried forward by a Freemason and an Oddfellow named Leland Stanford, who sets up Stanford University in California. And you will see Minerva, and if you want to see the Masonic tie-in to this, you have to turn to, and it's fully documented in my book, the seal of the first Oddfellow Lodge in California and the Great Seal of the Grand Lodge of Oddfellows in California, which is a seal that ultimately becomes the State Seal of of California, where you have Minerva on the seal, and then you're going to have these other Enochian Royal Arch symbols where you have the word Eureka, which is again reference to Pythagoras. Esoterically speaking, is a reference to Pythagoras in the Vault of Enoch, restoring the mathematical wisdom by correctly pronouncing the Tetragrammaton, where he restores the 47th proposition of Euclid. That's the it of I have found it of Eureka. And then you also see the little miner there digging towards the underground vault. Esoterically, this is the discovery of the treasure vault, of the person digging towards the hidden treasure vault underneath the holy ground. Exoterically, it's a minor, but esoterically, when you combine it with Minerva, it's a reference to the secret trapdoor where the Vault of Enoch is discovered on the Temple Mount, and it's symbolizing the digging towards the secret hidden underground Vault of Enoch. And again, you have the word Eureka there and Minerva all confirming this.
Is there any other states that are like the Great Seal and the Seal of California with the Masonic symbolism in them?
Yeah, you've got two that, of course, it's a long story, but of course Pennsylvania is the keystone. This is a reference to Royal Arch Masonry. You can't have a archway without a keystone. And of course, if you know your higher degrees, your Mark Master Mason degree, they find the keystone of Hiram Abiff, and it's through the keystone that ultimately it's through this keystone that springs this trapdoor. The trapdoor is actually concealed in the keystone, and this is leads to this underground vault, the Vault of Enoch, concealed under these 9 archways. A keystone without a keystone, an archway can't stand, and of course a keystone binds all the other stones to it, and of course the symbolism, I get more into it in the Royal Arches. It's Pennsylvania where the Declaration of Independence is created and the Constitution that binds the 13 colonies into one United States. Therefore, Pennsylvania binds everything together. Thus, it's the keystone. And, of course, Texas is the lone star. This is a reference to the Egyptian dog star Sirius, which is the brightest star in the in the night sky, thus making it the lone star. And, of course, New York is the empire, which is a reference to the Knights Templar and the York Rite of DeWitt Clinton and Thomas Smith Webb. DeWitt Clinton was a former mayor of New York City and governor of New York State. So, yeah, you'll see this sigilism and symbolism on a lot of the state seals. Not all of them. You'll see it on some of the stuff, on some of the material and seals of colleges and universities. Enochian symbolism, restoration of knowledge, things like that, Hermes Trismegistus, things of that sort.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then, of course, New York being the financial capital of the world, and there's a connection there with the Templars, and then you have London, and then we have the Statue of Liberty, which also has some Royal Arch Enochian symbolism as well, right?
You have the Statue of Liberty, which is a temple to the number 7, and of course in the York Rite, the Royal Arch ceremonial is the 7th, and the number 7 is the Statue of Liberty is, for lack of a better word, a temple to the number 7. And of course, when you get into New York State, also you have the Erie Canal, which is Freemasonry's westward expansion. The entire Erie Canal lock system is a Royal Arch Masonic icon dedicated to Royal Arch Masonry. When the Erie Canal, it's a long story, I get into it in the book. When the Erie Canal is launched, they actually perform, DeWitt Clinton and the Royal Arch Masons actually bless it in a Royal Arch ceremonial where you have a wooden archway over one of the lock systems. The guy behind this is a Royal Arch Mason named Ezra Ames. And you can read all about that in the Royal Arch of Enoch book. I document it much more in depth.
The pentagram as a symbol for Sirius as Isis in the Egyptian pantheon. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. What you have going on there is this is a reference in Blue Lodge Freemasonry where you have the candidate portray Hiram Abiff in the Blue Lodge Master Mason ritual, the connection to Isis, the Virgin Mother of the Sun. This is, of course, the wife, sister of Osiris. You have to understand a little bit about what's going on in Blue Lodge Freemasonry, where you have the candidate portrays Hiram Abiff. I'm going to try to shorten this, make a long story real short, but you have the candidate portrays Hiram Abiff. He's betrayed by 3 fellowcrafts. He's murdered. His body is buried. He's resurrected. In a nutshell, this is a reference to the Osirian cycle where you have this Egyptian sun god, Osiris. He's murdered. He's resurrected. Osiris is resurrected by his virgin wife, Isis, who possesses the secret word, the secret name of God of Amun-Re or Ra. What this actual word is, we don't know, but she possessed the secret name of the Egyptian sun god, Amun-Re or Ra. The difference between Osiris and Amun-Re is, in a nutshell, Osiris is sort of the material sun. Amun-Re is the spiritual sun, the the esoteric wisdom behind the solar light, as it were. Isis possesses this secret name, and it's through this name that she's able to resurrect Osiris. And with his resurrection, he is born again, and it's through this resurrection that Isis births Horus, this other Egyptian sun god who takes Osiris's place. Osiris goes off to become the solar ruler of the dead, and of course, he's replaced by his solar heir, Horus. In the Greco-Roman mysteries, this is Apollo or Helios. In Blue Lodge Masonry, the candidate is dead as Hiram Abiff. This is Osiris, and we know this because when he's resurrected, he is resurrected on what's called the 5 points of fellowship. It's a body stance, and when he's resurrected, he has whispered in his ear the substitute word of a Master Mason. This is a substitute word of God. And of course, the 5 points form a pentagram. There are 5 points to a pentagram. And if you read Albert Pike, he'll tell you that the pentagram is the Pythagoras of, it represents Pythagoras, but also represents the Egyptian dog star Sirius, which in the Egyptian stellar pantheon is, of course, Isis. So you have this Isis parallel going on where she possessed the secret name of Amun-Re to resurrect Osiris, and when the candidate's resurrected in the Blue Lodge, he has this secret substitute word whispered in his ear upon the 5 points or the pentagram or Sirius, representing the Virgin Mother Isis, who of course births the sun god Horus. And of course the story, like the story of Osiris, the story of Hiram Abiff is replete with solar symbolism. Just briefly, Hiram Abiff is dead and resurrected. When he's dead, his body's concealed west of the temple, west representing the setting sun. His body is concealed with what's called a sprig of acacia. That's a flower that grew upon the Nile and is sacred to the sun god Apollo. When he goes missing, King Solomon dispatches 12 fellowcraft to go look for his body. The 12 fellowcraft are the 12 houses of the zodiac, looking for their lost solar ruler. When Hiram Abiff is resurrected, he's resurrected on what's called the strong grip of a lion's paw. This is a reference to the constellation Leo the Lion, which is the soul house of the sun. So you will see solar references all over Blue Lodge Freemasonry as well.
Yeah, what's interesting to me as well is you have the pentagram, which is, you know, upright, and then you have Osiris, which would be the symbol of Isis, you had mentioned, and then Osiris's brother, Set, which would be considered Satan, and then you have the Church of Satan, and their symbol is the inverted pentagram. So it's kind of interesting how you have the Church of Satan, which of course materialism and all that excess do thou wilt, and they use the symbol and they invert it. And then you have the Pythagoreans, which would be their sacred symbol, would be the pentagram.
Right. The pentagram is not necessarily beholden to the Church of Satan. I mean, you know, that pentagram can mean numerous things in different schemas. It's like any symbol. You know, there are usually, if not always, more than one interpretation to it. It can represent the Egyptian dog star Sirius. It can represent the Pythagoras, who referred to the pentagram, you know, as the 4 points were the 4 elements, and the mystical fifth element, you know, was mastery of the other 4 elements. The pentagram can refer to the planet Venus that makes a pentagonal orbit around the sun. You know, like you said, it can represent evil if you invert it with the 2 points up. You know, then you get into the Church of Satan. This is more modern day creation of Anton LaVey. But yeah, symbols can mean different things to different people, and you know, you know, just because one group uses it for one purpose doesn't necessarily, you know, associate it with the other group's purpose for using it.
Yeah, no, I agree. Definitely, there's different. If you study symbolism, there's different interpretations that come down, and it can be used in different ways, and it doesn't mean that they're all interconnected. So, you know, I agree with you there. Okay, let's go ahead and wrap up this interview, Robert. I really appreciate your time. In regards to people that want to find out more about your work, where is the best website to send them to?
Yes, I'll give you my site, and then I'll give you one other lesser one, or another one, I shouldn't say lesser one. For me, you're interested in finding me and buy the book, and you're interested in my work, www.robertwsullivaniv.com. My last name is the fourth And again, it's www.robertwsullivaniv.com. There are links there to follow me on Twitter. There are links there to buy the book. It's in ebook format for $9.99. It's on Kindle. It's on Nook. If you want the oversized paperback, I'd recommend going to my publisher, which is www.rsplaunchpad.com. If you go to my site, there's links for fan pages on Facebook, my Twitter feed. There's videos you can go watch. There's a link to my YouTube channel where you can watch some videos that I've produced. You can also go listen to some of my other podcasts that appear there. There's 2 email addresses if you want to ask me a question. Again, there's links to buy the book. You can buy the oversized paperback. It's a 700-page book, so if you want it in Kindle, Nook, it's on Apple's iBookstore. That's only $9.99. You can't go wrong for a 700-page book. And again, that's www.robertwsullivaniv.com, and that's Sullivan with 2 L's.
Great. No, that's a big book, and I know a lot of the subjects that we brought up, you only could go briefly into some of those subjects, or else this would be a 10-hour conversation. So if you're interested in some of those talking points that Robert had briefed us on, you definitely want to get this book, and I'm definitely interested. I wanted to hear more, and we only have a short amount of time, and I appreciate that you gave your time to us today, Robert. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there, that would appreciate to hear from an actual Freemason that has the historical background and training that you've had, going to Oxford and then also growing up in this area and being a 32nd degree Freemason, and then also the years of research that you put into this book. I believe 10 years of research?
20 years, actually.
Wow. 20 years. Yeah, so
go ahead.
No, that's great. Some people put out 20 books in 20 years, and you instead took your time with the research and made sure you got it right. And it definitely makes a difference as opposed to someone who researches, a subject for 2 years and puts out a book every couple of years. So that definitely tells me something, that this is quality. And I believe my ancestors come from, the Freemason background, even though I am not a Freemason myself. I'm definitely interested in the craft, and that's what people need to understand out there, is that even if you aren't a Freemason, you could study it. It's open to you, and if you are interested in it, join your local lodge and find out for yourself. And that's about it. Thank you for your time, Robert.
Well, listen, Mo, I want to thank you for having me on Gnostic Warrior. I thought it was a great interview, and maybe when my next book comes out, we can do this all over again.
That sounds great. You have a happy New Year and happy holidays.
Yeah, you as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.